The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode of Gators Breakdown is former Gators wide receiver and now currently an analyst with the SEC Network and co-host of SEC Today on SiriusXM, Chris Doering. Chris, thanks for joining me here on Gators Breakdown again, and you're wearing many hats these days.
Yeah, it's good to be back on with you, man. I appreciate you having me, and definitely spread myself a little bit thin, but it's all good stuff. Excited to be on SiriusXM now, and just re-signed with ESPN and the SEC Network for another 2 years. So excited about that opportunity as well.
Oh, good news there. So yeah, we'll get to see you and get your thoughts for college football and SEC football for much longer now.
Yeah.
All righty, guys. Remember, you can find all the Gators Breakdown episodes on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as the articles from the News for Jax sports team. That's news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Also, catch it on iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube if you want the video version. And when using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. And on social media, follow us at Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook. So we won't bury the lead here, Chris. And of course, the depth chart got released ahead of the Charleston Southern game on Monday. And after a highly contested quarterback battle, Felipe Franks was named starting quarterback. Chris, you were able to see some practices and scrimmages. What made Franks the choice for Mullen?
I'm not so sure that it was a clear-cut definitive choice. In the practices I saw, I think I saw some good things from each of them. I saw some things that made me a little skeptical as well. At the end of the day, I think these guys are still very young and raw in terms of their quarterback development. They're being taught, I think, a little differently than what they've been taught previously. And one of the biggest things I think that's impeding their development is just the consistency of the offensive line. I mean, that was a problem last year. That offensive line gave up 36 sacks, which was 13th or 14th in the SEC, I believe. They returned all the starters from last year, but still, is that a good thing necessarily? You like to believe that they may have gotten better and that there's more continuity up front, but I haven't seen that consistency that I want to see. So you can have all the great weapons that Florida has, which I do believe they're better at wide receiver than they've been. I think they're deeper and more talented at running back than they've been. They've got a chance to be good at tight end. But if you're not able to block effectively up front, you don't have a quarterback that can process and deliver the ball accurately, then, what's it really worth at the end of the day? So I think Felipe Franks is the guy that they're going to go with because he has that experience from last year. I also think it was a little bit of managing personalities as well. And I think that Kyle Trask has shown his ability to come off the bench in the past, whether as a high school guy or a guy that's had to sit on the bench behind some other guys during his time in Gainesville. And I think, quite honestly, Felipe Franks is a guy that has a temperament that may have been damaged had he had to be relegated to the bench, had he not won that job. So I think you go with Franks. Hopefully he plays well. If he doesn't, at least you can go to Kyle Trask, whereas if it was Kyle Trask and he didn't play well, I don't know that bringing Felipe off the bench would be as quite as attractive as an opportunity as it is when you have Kyle Trask as your backup.
Chris, when we look at this, quarterbacks in general and these quarterbacks, it's, about their arm, but we know in the Dan Mullen offense, the quarterback's legs is important as well. How much do we expect with Felipe Franks, and if eventually it gets to Kyle Trask, can we expect these quarterbacks to run?
I think that Dan Mullen has described it fairly accurately. It's not looking for a guy that necessarily wants to run. It's a guy that's willing to run. And they're going to put a lot of different pressures on the defense by a lot of zone read, a lot of the option stuff that they do. And the quarterback's going to be required to not only read it properly, but if he is given the opportunity to run, then he has to be a willing runner, as Dan Mullen has said. Get what you can, fall forward, and preserve yourself. It doesn't have to be a Nick Fitzgerald type of runner where you're picking up big gains and you're taking big hits. I think you just have to be willing to take what the defense gives you because you're going to be putting those guys in some binds with the scheme that Dan Mullen runs.
All righty, Chris, I asked some of our listeners out there, Gators Breakdown listeners, for some questions, and Drew Helmich wanted to ask you, since you played the game, you have a lot of different perspective than a lot of us out there. Do you have more patience for a quarterback like Felipe Franks more than the average fan, given that he struggled last year and is a redshirt freshman?
I have less patience for the quarterbacks. In fact, I think, I played in the day of Florida where the quarterback was held to a high standard under Steve Spurrier, and he was pretty apt to switch quarterbacks, as you know. If he wasn't happy with what he was seeing out there in the field. It was a rotating door at times. So I think I am one that believes that the quarterback should be able to read defenses, that he should be able to throw the ball accurately. And I think a lot of it goes back to the way that the previous staff practiced and the way they taught. I'm not trying to bang on guys that aren't here anymore, but I really believe that coaching on the field and not necessarily trying to get as many reps on tape and going back and coaching at the time. I thought Coach Berger did a really good job, and Dwayne Dixon, our receiver coach, did a good job of providing feedback on the field so that when you took that next rep, you didn't make that same mistake again. And I think that these guys haven't necessarily been put in positions to be as successful as they can. But at the end of the day, there does have to be some accountability that comes along with it too. And if you're not performing, you got to be able to move on to the next guy. And I think that's what Florida didn't have last year. I went back and actually was watching that Kentucky game from last season. When Del Rio went in there was a distinct rhythm that you could see. He was getting people lined up. He was getting them to the line. They were going, and they were developing some continuity. And that's what offensive football is all about, is rhythm. So I think once Del Rio went down, you lost the ability to go to anybody else. You kind of had to go with Franks. Kyle Trask was hurt too after his surgery. So it was kind of the only option you really could turn to. And it unfortunately, I think, probably hurt the development of Felipe Franks with all of the turnovers, with all the negativity that he had to hear from the fan base. And hopefully this year he'll be able to shake that off and play well from game one.
All right, Chris, we know this team is deep at running back and will be a run-first team, and that's just a Dan Mullen offense in general. Just how successful do you see this offense being led by Scarlett Davis-Perine and the running game? Is there a ceiling just because they may have to rely on this running game so much?
Well, I think the ceiling is the offensive line. Again, I mean, just as we talk about how many sacks they give up, if they're not able to move people off the line of scrimmage, if they're not able to be physical at the point of attack, it doesn't matter how good you are in the running back room. So I think Scarlett, I saw him in the spring. I've seen him this fall. He's running like a man with a chip on his shoulder. He's got something to prove. His body looks like he definitely spent time away when he was not with the team working out. And I think even Nick Savage has taken him to another level. It's great to see Malik Davis back after that injury. He looks to be fast. He looks to be able to cut the same way we saw him in the first half of his true freshman year. Perine's a guy I think that doesn't get the credit that he deserves, because I think he definitely has shown himself to be not only dependable, but he's got a little burst in him as well. And then Lemons and Pierce, the true freshman Pierce, I'm really excited about those guys. I think they have a little contrast in style. But Pierce, record-setting type running back up in high school in the state of Georgia, is fast, has that breakaway speed, but also finishes runs physically. So I think the only real problem that I see outside of the offensive line, maybe not giving them the room to run, is how you get enough touches to feed all these guys. And I think managing egos is going to be a challenge for this offensive staff.
Yeah, Pierce was probably my favorite recruit off of this last class, and we've heard some things that he's ready to go as a true freshman, and I think we're ready to see that if as you said, they can spread these carries out enough. Start with Scarlett, and I'll tell you what, Davis, he just really seems to be that home run threat that this running back core has been missing for a few seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing again that was frustrating. Every time you felt like you had something last year, it gets taken away with injury. And he was certainly one of the bright spots through the first half of the season. And to see him go down, he didn't have much home run threat in the passing game. I think Cleveland was about all you had there, and they couldn't necessarily get the ball to him as much as you wanted to. And then when you lose Davis, you were more of a plotting type offense, limited because of your own athleticism and speed.
Chris, this word potential can be scary sometimes, but that's what we're looking at, this wide receiver core with Van Jefferson and Trayvon Grimes coming in. And as you mentioned, Tyree Cleveland, and you've mentioned it's going to hinge on this offensive line, but the potential is there with this wide receiver core.
Yeah, we've talked about potential for probably the last 5 or 6 years when it comes to the wide receiver position. I think the difference now is you got a guy in Billy Gonzalez that really teaches the details. I was impressed with him in his first stint in Gainesville under Urban Meyer. Had a number of great receivers that went on and had good careers in the NFL. And I've gotten to know him a little bit. He coaches receivers more the way that I was coached with Dwayne Dixon and Coach Berger. It's attention to detail, really. I mean, it's about teaching the little things. It's about having guys with the proper shoulder lean come off the line of scrimmage. It's about putting your foot in the ground and getting separation. It's about getting your head around these guys now are being taught much better than I think they have been in the last few years. I see Tyree Cleveland, as a guy that's now running intermediate routes, catching the football with his hands, not just a deep threat, to take the top off the secondary. I see Hammond, who's always been a little bit of a pretty good route runner, now expanding what he's able to do. So I do like Van Jefferson and his proven production in the SEC. I think Grimes, while he has an NFL-ready body, still has some development to do himself. But I think all in all, there is a lot of potential here, and I think they have a better chance to realize it because of the way they've been taught over the spring and fall camp so far.
Chris, we know the history of Dan Mullen and fixing offenses, but what should the expectation be in year one for fixing this offense?
I was of the belief that this was a team that could win 8 or 9 games just because of how much talent was on the roster. I thought they were much better than the 4-7 record last season reflected. But as I've watched a little bit, I still think you're going to be limited because of the offensive line and the quarterback position. I know people have said, "Oh man, the quarterbacks are going to be so much further along." I don't necessarily buy it. I think they look great in one-on-ones and in half-field situations and 7-on-7. But when the bullets are flying, I don't know that I see that calm, collected kind of air about the quarterbacks that you'd love to see. And I think that's the thing that I got spoiled by playing with Danny Warfel. Is this guy was okay in practice, but he took it to another level when it got to the games. And I think a lot of times these quarterbacks, from what we've seen, they may be the other way around. When I've seen them in scrimmage situations in the stadium, it hasn't necessarily been that same cool, calm, collected nature that you like. So I know it's a work in progress, but I think Gator fans should temper their enthusiasm a little bit because it's not an overnight fix. It's not an overnight fix on the field, and it's not an overnight fix with the culture. I do think there's still Dan Mullen has a job in front of him to fix these guys with their own mental limitations. They think they're going hard, but they don't know what hard is necessarily. Nick Savage did a lot to help develop that during the offseason strength and conditioning program, but it's still a recurring problem that Dan Mullen's trying to deal with, and I don't know if they can fix it in year one, unfortunately.
All right, Chris Doering here from the SEC Network, former Gators wide receiver, joining me here on Gators Breakdown. Just a few more questions for him before we let him go here. And last year, Chris, we saw a team, we saw a defense that took a big step back last year as far as the standard goes for a Florida defense. For many reasons, the defense went away from that attacking mentality, and now they get that back with Todd Grantham, the new defensive coordinator, coming in. Can they just flip a switch and get in the right mindset after playing much differently last season?
I've had a chance to talk to a bunch of these defenders, and they're all excited about playing in this scheme, a much more aggressive attacking scheme, as you kind of referenced. Look no further than Mississippi State last year. Todd Grantham comes in, and that became a defense that really got after the quarterback. Montez Sweat led the conference in sacks last season. Jeffrey Simmons was a beast in the middle. Obviously, those guys have talent, but they were put in positions to be more aggressive. And I think that's kind of what has these defenders licking their chops a little bit. CeCe Jefferson's a guy that's told me, how excited he is about to be utilized in a number of different ways in this defense. So I think Todd Grantham comes in year one and really cranks things up. I think you look at this defense, the defensive line, I had them in my top 5 when we ranked it earlier in the SEC Network in August. I think the linebackers are really good, but thin at that position. I think in the secondary, you may have the best pair of cornerbacks in C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson. Unfortunately, you have a lot of youth and inexperience behind that. So Florida doesn't have the luxury of being able to sustain injuries and not miss a beat. They've got to stay healthy on that side of the ball. But I do believe that where there are some potential deficiencies and shortcomings in that back half of the defensive line and their aggressive nature is going to be able to overcome some of that, in my opinion.
Okay, good. That's exactly the way I look at it there too. Chris, you mentioned Marco Wilson, C.J. Henderson, and you playing wide receiver. You know what makes great cornerbacks. What did those guys show you in their first years to already be labeled as top tier in the SEC?
C.J. Henderson got a lot of praise in his first season because he was always around the ball. There was something about him. I think he had 4 interceptions last year, a couple of picks to the house. So this is a guy that definitely has a nose for the ball. I think, and I look at Marco Wilson, I think he's got a chance to be better than his brother Quincy. And we're talking about, a pretty good cornerback in his own right. He's physical, he's big, he's athletic, he can play press coverage, he can play off, he's not afraid to tackle So I really do believe that he was overlooked a little bit last year because it was Henderson that was getting a lot of the interceptions and breakups. And I think people maybe shy away from Marco Wilson a little bit because of just how good he is on that other side.
Now, a couple more questions here for Chris Doering. Gators had the opener last year versus Michigan, and much different this year. A year later, you're facing an opponent that you should handle pretty easily in Charleston Southern. There's still plenty of reasons to be excited, as you know, as this is Dan Mullen's first game. This is really a game that's really more and all about Florida. What are things you'd like to see in Dan Mullen's first game against an overmatched opponent?
I want to see some offensive rhythm, and we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of last year's offense. I want to see a quarterback that can get their guys to the line of scrimmage, that can get in and out of the huddle, that can get proper cadence. And really, I don't want to see a bunch of penalties. That's one thing I've seen an awful lot of is false start penalties, premature snaps, different things that put the offense in long yardage situations. Florida's not good enough offensively to overcome negative plays on first and second down. Just, they're limited at this point in time. So I'd like to see some offensive continuity. I'd like to be able to see some drives be sustained, converting some third downs, moving the chains a little bit. And then defensively, I'm excited about that aggressive nature. I think the defense is going to have to carry this team early in the season until the offense kind of develops a personality and who they're going to be and figure out exactly what pieces fit together the best. So I think the defense has got to be ready to bail the offense out at times. They got to be aggressive in nature. They got to create some turnovers. And I think that's what Todd Grantham's kind of excited about. I mean, I think he's shown he's got free reign with Dan Mullen when he was in Starkville, and I think the same is going to hold true here in Gainesville.
Chris, Dan Mullen's first year, an overmatched opponent, game 1, Kentucky game 2. How much game planning goes into a game like this, especially where this is a team that's basically, in a way, still learning?
I don't think it's necessarily about a game plan necessarily for week 1. I think it's about, hey, let's do what we do. Let's figure out what it is. And Dan Mullen's talked about this through everything at the quarterbacks, and then they go back and watch it on film and figure out which of those things they do best, which of the things fits those quarterbacks' eyes the best, and then figure out a game plan around those types of plays. And I think that's what you'll see in this game. I'll be honest with you, David, I'm really worried about the Kentucky game. And I know a lot of fans that maybe don't know a lot about Kentucky think, hey, we beat them 31 years in a row. It's going to be 32, no problem. But I think this is the most important game on the Florida schedule. One, because Kentucky is a lot more talented. You look across the board offensively, got more depth of talent than I've seen in Lexington in a long time. They return a bunch of starters on defense, even though they lost Denzel Ware in the spring when he transferred to Jacksonville State. But it's going to be a challenge. If this was a game in Lexington, I would probably pick Kentucky to upset Florida because Florida's going to be still so young and new in what they're trying to do. But I think the Swamp hopefully can provide a good home field advantage for the Gators. But at the end of the day, if things go wrong in that Kentucky game, how do they respond? I don't know that there's a bunch of leaders right now. I don't know there's a bunch of mental toughness. If things don't go Florida's way early on, I don't know that there's those leaders to stabilize things and get them back on track and make plays when they need to. I believe if they lose that game to Kentucky, they probably lose at Tennessee. I think if they win at Kentucky, there's a pretty good chance they go to Knoxville in their first road trip of the year and they have much more confidence. So I think it's a big mental game for Florida in week 2. And that's not to overlook this weekend with Charleston Southern, but I think at the end of the day, that Kentucky game is going to loom largely and really define the trajectory of the season from there on out.
Yeah, I think one thing that helps there, Chris, is, that was Mississippi State's permanent crossover rival. So Mullen knows that team pretty well.
He knows that team well, and I think what they did last year was they were incredibly physical with Kentucky. They out-physicaled the Wildcats. I don't know if Florida has that same physicality on the offense like Mississippi State did last year. But you're right. They've played them a lot in the past. They know them well. And at the end of the day, this is now an SEC East rival for Dan Mullen. He's going to have to – I think there's a tier of teams in the SEC East. I think it's Georgia. And I think the next tier is Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Missouri. And I think those teams will be battling to try to contend with Georgia. It'll be interesting to see who kind of comes out of that pod as the next best team in that division.
All right, Chris, and the last one here, you just mentioned Kentucky as probably one of the most dangerous games for Florida. But what game are you most excited to see for the Gators this year?
Oh man, I'm excited about that return to Starkville for Dan Mullen. I think that's a game that I've predicted Florida probably loses just because of all of the factors. I think, quite honestly, I think Mississippi State is probably the third best team in this conference. I have them going 11-1 with a loss to Alabama in the regular season, but I think that they're extremely talented. Their defensive line is probably the best in the conference, right there with Auburn. I think they have a quarterback in Nick Fitzgerald that can do a lot. I think Joe Moorhead will hone his passing accuracy and help him become a more well-rounded quarterback. But at the end of the day, the emotion in that stadium, I know those fans are really going to be looking forward to having Dan Mullen return. It'll be interesting to see if they cheer for him or they boo him, or there's a mix of emotions with him coming back, given all the success he had and departing the way he did for another Southeastern Conference foe. But that's the game I think I'm kind of most excited about right now.
Sounds good. So Gator fans, you can find him on SEC Network and Sirius Radio with the SEC channel there. So Chris Doering, I can't thank you enough for joining me here again on Gators Breakdown and breaking down these Gators.
Yeah, man, always good to be with you. I love what you do and appreciate your work, man.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Take care.
Ever since I started this podcast, people have been asking me for advice. Usually it's what team to bet on this week. The truth is, I don't know who's going to win. But if you think you know, you got to check out MyBookie. Remember, who you're betting on is just as important as who you're betting with. That's why I tell people to bet with MyBookie. Trust me, guys, they are your best bet this season. They've been in the business for years, have great reviews, and an easy-to-use mobile site. So lay down some cash and win big today. Hey, look, guys, I'd only recommend a service to my listeners that's been good to me. That's why I urge you to make your way to MyBookie. You win, they pay. MyBookie has in-game live betting, the most rewarding player perks in the business. And for you fantasy guys out there, you can even bet the over-under on how many fantasy points a player will score in each game. So join MyBookie now, and they will match your deposit dollar for dollar. Use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MyBookie, mybookie.ag. And don't forget to use promo code Gators when creating your account to claim the bonus. MyBookie, you win. Wait, MyBookie, you play, you win, you get paid. So, guys, I did on Twitter, I asked you out there, what do you want to see in game one? And what do you expect to see versus Charleston Southern? And got a lot of responses out there, as I figured we would. Hey, look, we're all excited for this Dan Mullen's first game here. And we should be. This is the first game of the season, and it is much different than that Michigan game last year, for the excitement of just a big game. But this game is exciting because it's Dan Mullen's first game, and we're ready to see these new-look Gators. So started off with Ryan Jones. He wants to see good offensive line play, how the linebacker depth looks, and how is R.J. Raymond going to be blocking as an H-back. Can Franks take a breath and relax to make the right choices quickly and trust his coaching? So, a couple of things there. Of course, offensive line play, as Chris Doering just mentioned in the show, all important, going to be important, going probably to carry this team just as far as the quarterbacks do. And the R.J. Raymond thing, look, we've mentioned it time and time again. Go back to 2005 when Florida was struggling on offense, had a bye week before the Georgia game. In come Billy Latsko, and it's kind of a blocking style of H-back and trying to help this running game get some lanes and get going there. So, there's two aspects there that I really like what Ryan brought up there with R.J. Raymond and, of course, the offensive line play. Brett Adams says a competent offense that can move the ball, an offensive line that can bully, a couple big plays on offense, an aggressive defense that flies to the ball, a defense that doesn't miss tackles, more discipline and fewer penalties. All that is what I want. Hopefully we see 4 out of the 6 there. So, a competent offense, of course, we talked about it earlier, an offense that can get up to the line of scrimmage and not wait till so late into the play clock. Get up there, get to the line, make some checks and changes if you have to. Snap the ball with some time left in the play clock. Get up there and dictate. That's what I want to see from this offense. I want to see some dictation and not so you heard Will mention it, and you go back to last year's games, and there was no cadence hardly last year. Defensive lines, opposing defensive lines could just fire off the ball because they knew what was coming in this Florida offense. So they're just these little things that add up to make an offense look more competent. There's some big plays. Yeah, definitely. I expect to see some big plays here from an overmatched opponent. Offensive line that can bully. I remember going back to last year, and even going back to the spring games this past season, of seeing this offensive line just come out with some fire and start really just bowling over teams. It starts especially with an overmatched opponent that you have in Charleston Southern there. So Atlanta Gator, Casey Hampton here at C Hampton 85. He wants to see a win, a good old-fashioned win, not a grinded-out 17-9 win, but a return to a Gator win. That's all he wants to see. And look, guys, we know what that means. That is going back to Muschamp, going back to McElwain in these games where you're playing the cupcakes, and it's a game into the fourth quarter. We want to see a game where, as it should happen, Florida should be putting up 50, 60 points in this game. This really shouldn't be a game fireworks. That's what we want to see. We want to have some fun in the swamp. We want to be, clapping hands with fans all around us because Florida's putting up touchdown after touchdown. And, offense, defense, special teams, however it happens, mainly on offense, of course. We want to see Felipe Franks come out and throw the ball well, get some backup, some playing time. We want to see some Kyle. Felipe Franks isn't going to play the whole game. He shouldn't play the whole game if it's a blowout. Get Kyle Trask in, get him some playing time, get him his first real game playing time, maybe some packages for Emory Jones as well. And we'll see how deep this running back rotation goes, too, in a game. Where you should be able to get plenty of them some playing time here. So that goes into the next one. That's Stephen Allen Lee. He wants to see Emory Jones. He expects to see Felipe Franks be super average even in this game. So Stephen Allen wants to really see Emory Jones make an appearance here. And I think he will as long as he's playing here. Gators 2018 it's at Doug Rinker. Anything different / better than what we saw last year will work for me. I don't want the brakes put on with points. Keep scoring till it's over, and then the same thing next week. Don't ever take our foot off their throats. Richard Jordan says 30-plus points for the offense, 100-yard rusher, 200 yards in the air, defense with 4 tackles for loss, keep them to 13 points or less, 1 great special teams play. And let's see, Terrell Jones Sr. says, I expect to see Dan do what he does. He's a great coach and great calls great plays. Dan and the players will do all their jobs. Florida fans need to be there. I've been working, even being recruited. I've been a diehard Gator fan since '89. Gator Nation needs to pack the stadium here, and that is needs to happen. There are plenty of cheap tickets out there on the secondary market. Let's pack the swamp for Dan Mullen's first game. Here. It should be a good time. It's a night kickoff. You'll have all day to tailgate, plenty of time to get down to Gainesville. Let's sit there and pack that swamp and be loud there. So Lonnie Sunshine at MJ Exchange, what he wants, 250 plus yards rushing and 200 yards passing. What he expects, discipline play and less penalties there. So, a lot of Gator fans mentioning discipline, less penalties, because we saw too much of that in the past, no matter who Florida was playing here. Bobby Glenn, let's see here. Rowdy Lizard, polite with 4 sacks. I tell you what, we did our over-under in the last episode, and that would go good. That would be a good start for me in this Gators getting at least 30 sacks for the season here. Polite gets 4 sacks. He also wants 300 yards rushing. It'd be a lot, but hey, look, with Sable back Florida has and this opponent, 300 yards rushing might be attainable here. 4 passing touchdowns, a shutout, 50 points for the offense, a pick 6, a return touchdown. That ought to do it for Bobby Glenn, he says. So Bobby Glenn taking out everything here and what he wants to see these Gators do. Bob C. At Rack 1170. I want to see Franks at 60% completion with at least 250 yards passing. I expect to see 400 yards on offense with at least 35 points here. And yeah, I'd say they expect the total for a game like this, at least in the 40s. for what you're trying to do. Dan Mullen's not going to let off the gas here. This is a time for, as I mentioned, fans need to go to this game. But I think Dan Mullen knows what fans want to see, and this would be a chance to. It's an overmatched opponent. It doesn't really mean much in the end, as far as a point total. But look, it's a lot more fun when you see your team scoring a ton of points. So I think if Dan Mullen can get the team to do it, they'll be doing it here. Thomas Moss at Gator Moss, 500 plus yards on offense, a pick six, a block punt, complete dominant on defense, a 63-7 score. He wants to hear the fans roaring, the swamp back to life, fireworks, fans, players thumping to the beat on a spiritual experience, exploding enthusiasm. As you can tell there, Thomas Moss is ready for some Gator football when the Gators kick off this Saturday. Fourth and Jort, still probably one of the best Twitter names of all time there. I kind of laugh every time and chuckle with it. So once he 6 passing touchdowns, that'd be a lot. 400 yards through the air. What he expects, 3 rushing touchdowns, 300 yards on the ground. So added a couple more here. Attitude 14, improved offensive line play, new special teams additions show promise in an aggressive yet disciplined defense, and 0 injuries. And that is another thing. Injuries come into play here. You're trying to build depth in games like this. A lot of guys are going to be on the field. Injuries are going to happen; they're part of the game. But hopefully, the Gators can, for the most part, besides in the secondary, are pretty healthy. Brett Hagee along the offensive line, coming back. So for the most part, pretty healthy, except for that secondary safety position here. Lord Heller says Malik Davis distancing himself from the other backs, so we don't have to watch 3 running backs split 35 to 40 carries. I expect them to go pretty deep here into the running back rotation. I don't think you're going to play Jordan Scarlett a whole lot. Malik Davis, maybe just enough to show what he can do in a game situation coming back from an injury. So I expect a lot of Michael Pirine, Darius Lemons, and Damian Pierce in this game, and not so much Jordan Scarlett and Malik Davis. I think you'll see those guys early, but you won't see them often here. Ryan Hinckley wants to see 70 points, but he expects to see half that. So look, it's PTSD from a lot of these McElwain and Muschamp offenses here. So a lot of wait and see mode for Gator fans here as we get some of these expectations. Kevin Kuzma, I want to see an insanely aggressive defense. Remind me of Jeff Collins, please. I expect to see that as well. So, I think we will see some aggressiveness. I think some of the aggressiveness will actually just come in being overmatched. This defensive line versus a Charleston Southern offense is going to be running a pretty conservative triple option, maybe from a shotgun type of offense here. So, this game might go by pretty fast, as much as Florida may be running the ball and Charleston Southern runs the ball as well. And with that style of play, I'm not sure how aggressive Florida will be, and also just putting a lot of stuff on tape. Of course, everybody probably knows Todd Grantham and his defense, but I don't think he'll show too much here as far as scheme goes. But you can still be aggressive without kind of scheming it up that way. Nick Self, I want to see our O-line not get destroyed by lesser opponents. There we go again, and expect to see 250 plus rushing yards. Last couple here, I'd like to see us run for over 200. This is from Sean Hankins. I'd like to see us run for over 250 yards. Franks looks good. Franks to look good through his progressions and have 4 total touchdowns. We'll win by 50. Wishful thinking, LOL. So, we'll see. We'll see. I think the Gators will put up a good bit of points here. Comment before that was Nick Self, where he wants to see the offensive line not get destroyed. So I didn't want to leave his name off there. And Gator Cowboy fan, he wants to see 350 yards passing, expect to see 300 yards rushing and 150 yards passing. Need to see depth at linebacker, and in the secondary, safety is still an issue. So, thank you guys for sending all that. All your thoughts here. We know a lot of people are excited about the Dan Mullen's first game, and you definitely showed it in all the tweets that you sent our way when I threw that out there, and what you want to see and what you expect to see this Saturday in the swamp. And then I want to talk about a couple more things before I wrap up this episode in the offensive line. Like me, a lot of you guys know just how much of a struggle it's been up front. And while I know many of you want to see Franks pass it all over the stadium Saturday night, I think this is a chance to get the offense in a groove early, and I expect a lot of running still. Now, I do expect a little more passing because I think Mullen wants to see Franks and the other quarterbacks handle it under the lights. But this is a chance for the offensive line to go out there and just dominate. You get some confidence heading in to Kentucky and play the game and game speed. Just get this offensive line. We've heard Hevesy and Mullen talk about this offensive line keeping up with the pace, and this now will be a game speed pace, and I don't think it'll be as fast as what they were showing them in practice. That was going at speed 100. I'm not sure if Florida's going to be going at speed 100 all the time, but you prepare that way, and I think Florida and this offensive line, Dan Mullen and John Hevesy, we just want to see how these guys react to this new style of offense in the game type of situation, and work on what they know they would do well, and that's running the ball. And one more thing I think we must see if Franks gets off to a good start and prepare him for those back-to-back road trips for Tennessee and Mississippi State later on in the season. He has 3 weeks to play in this offense and do it under the lights and that game speed for him as well, much like this offensive line. Only one of these first 3 opponents posed a threat, and that's Kentucky. And it's also a team that Franks struggled against on the road last season. So, look, Franks wasn't great overall last season, but he was much better at home than he was on the road. So he needs to get these 3 games, put it all together, and prepare for that really tough back-to-back stretch with Tennessee and Mississippi State. Now, look, he had overall more numbers at home, playing in 6 games, going 89 for 154, completing 57.8% of his throws. On the road in 5 games, he went 36 for 75 and only 48% completion percentage. So 976 yards at home, 462 on the road. Yards per attempt were 6.3 and 6.2 at home. A 7-6 touchdown to interception ratio, 2-2 on the road. He averaged more passing attempts at home with 25, and yards per game at home were 162.7 compared to 92.4 on the road. So a big disparaging, statistical, breakdown there of Felipe Franks and his difference from playing at home and playing on the road. He played much better at home than he did on the road. So now, look, two of the best defenses were away from the swamp last season when Florida played Michigan and Georgia in neutral sites. But it started with that Kentucky game on the road and getting pulled there and pretty much continue all season. So I think it's imperative for Franks to really build his confidence in these first 3 games before going on the road, and it starts Saturday night versus Charleston Southern. If he does really well, I don't know, how much we can take away from this, but except for the fact that it's better than the alternative. Franks must not struggle in this game. And, I think he'll put a pretty good showing on and set himself up for a big game against Kentucky next week. So I had some people ask, and I guess it's mostly got lost in the shuffle and stuff. And I made some picks and predictions back in the SEC media days, picking Florida second in the East. And, I gave the prediction of 8-4, and I'm still sticking with that there. Some people have asked about my predictions for this season, and the 8-4, much like Doring here, Chris Doring earlier in the episode, this quarterback position, this offensive line still makes me skittish of picking. Florida. I expected once fall camp started that I hope I would feel better about the quarterback position at this point where we are right now. And, I was leaning 8-4, 9-3. And now I'm a pretty solid 8-4, given the questions of quarterback and offensive line play. I got the losses to Mississippi State, Georgia, South Carolina, or Missouri, and FSU. Now, look, I can see 9-3 with better quarterback play, but it's just something I have to see before I can actually pick 9-3. And look, the South Carolina, Missouri, I'm going back and forth, maybe of who I pick, Florida to lose one of those 2 games. But look, it's a first-year coach. You bring a new coach in, you get some ups and you get some downs. With the ups, beat beat LSU. Go on the road and beat Tennessee, can end in the season to beat FSU. I don't know. It's hard to kind of pinpoint the games. Florida may lose here this season. The Georgia's ones I definitely feel the most confidence in, and Florida maybe not being able to pull out a win there. That road trip to Starkville as well is pretty dangerous, but 8-4, it's about what I see. I think that a lot of people have asked me too, what would be a successful season this season? 8-4 to me would be successful. You would have some good wins if you go 8-4. You would beat hopefully a pretty good LSU team. You would beat a South Carolina or a Missouri, where people are high on Missouri, or maybe one of those wins is FSU. Maybe one of those wins is Georgia. Maybe one of those wins is on the road at Mississippi State. And I will say it's imperative for Florida to start 4-0. I think to get into kind of this 8-4, 9-3 mark. Florida has to go to Knoxville at 3-0 and walk out of there with a W. That's kind of just how I see it play out. If you want the 8-4, 9-3 type there, it sets you up pretty nice for the rest of the schedule and the rest of the run there. So there, getting excited. It's game week, and we'll be down there in the swamp, and I'll be down there. I'll look for a lot of you guys out there, be tailgating and ready for the game. Much like you guys. So thanks for Chris Doering. Again, can't thank him enough for joining me here on Gators Breakdown. Remember, you can find him on SiriusXM, SEC Network, and all his thanks for him for sharing all his insight on the Gators, and a unique perspective from a player's perspective that only he can bring. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and you can find Gators Breakdown on newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.